meeting. Call to order. The Water Supply Planning Committee of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District for Monday, April the 4th, 2022 at 3 p.m. Roll call.
Dave, could you do it?
We can now hear you.
Oh, you can do it now? Okay. Committee member Riley,
Here.
committee member Paul,
Here.
Chair Edwards,
Here.
all committee members are present.
Thank you. Now we have any comments from the public. The public may comment on any item within the district jurisdiction. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any public?
Yes, so if you would like to make public comment, please raise your hand. And Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll return this back to the committee.
All right, thank you. First action item is consider adopting of the minutes for September the 7th, 2021 and November the 1st, 2021 and committee meetings minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move approval, but I have a comment.
Okay. I'll second it. For the comment, go ahead, Director Rao.
My comment is if there's some questions in the minutes, not substantively about the minutes, but the topics that were mentioned in the minutes, I may have some questions that follow up from the minutes into the discussion we had earlier. So I may refer back to the minutes. That's all I want to just comment on. Say I may be doing that. Okay.
Okay. Chair Paul, any comments?
I don't.
Okay, no comment. Joel, let's check the public, see if we have any.
Yes, so if you would like to make public comment on item number 1, please raise your hand. Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised.
Thank you. Okay, roll call vote, please.
Committee member Paul,
Yes.
committee member Riley,
Aye.
Chair Edwards,
Yes,
the motion passes on a vote of 3-0.
thank you. Next action item will be adoption of the 2022 committee meeting schedule.
I move
Any
approval of
question?
that too.
All right, we have a motion to approve. I'll second that. Joel, let's check with the public.
Yes, so if you have public comment on item number 2, please raise your hand. I'll return this back to
Okay, thank you. Roll call vote, please.
committee member Paul,
Yes.
committee member Riley,
Aye.
Chair Edwards.
Yes.
The motion passes on a vote of 3-0.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the district general manager for the discussion items. Number 3.
Yep. So our first one is an update on Pure Water Monterey, the base project. I'm going to discuss performance to date, the schedule, and then the tracer test situation. We prepared the packet right before the end of the month, and so we now have values through and including March 31st. So the first exhibit 3A, we have added for March 341.9173 acre feet of delivery. And the reason that's interesting, and I wanted to call it out, is if you look at any of the prior months for fiscal 21-22, so July through February, you'll see that this is by far the largest injection rate or injection total, and that reflects deep injection well number 3 and deep injection well number 4 beginning to come online. It wasn't for the full month, but it does show the additional capacity that was created by those as we began both step testing and bringing them online. And I think you'll see in April, potentially even a higher number for total injection. So what that does is it brings the fiscal year 21-22 deliveries for company water, or the far right-hand column of the first chart in Exhibit 3A, to 2,584.2 acre feet. And so when you add together last fiscal year of 2474, the current fiscal year to date of 2584, and the amount that we've diverted to the operating reserve of just over 1,200 acre feet, that means since the inception of deliveries, we've now seen deliveries of 6,259 acre feet, which is pretty great. For the remainder of the current fiscal year, in order to meet our 3,500 acre foot performance guarantee, we will need to deliver about 305 acre feet per month for each of the next 3 months, which, when you look at the averages, looks doable. And in fact, if we get production and delivery similar to March or higher, given the 2 new wells, then we will also be able to make a deposit to the operating reserve, which in a year and 3 months needs to increase to about 1,750 acre feet. So things are looking really good from that perspective. I did not bring it to put on the screen. I'm not sure we need to put it on the screen, but exhibit, let the jet fly over. Sorry about that. Exhibit 3B is the executive level schedule for Pure Water Monterey. And the top section, if you will, all in green, are Deep Injection Well 3 and Deep Injection Well 4 testing and startup. And you can see that we're pretty much at the end of that point in June. So right now we're in April, so there's still a little more testing and startup, but we expect to be fully operational and kind of optimizing performance by June. And Maureen, by a shake of the head or a nod of the head, are we on schedule? Yeah, so we're on schedule to do so, which is great. The second section of the executive schedule in Exhibit 3B is expansion. And what I wanted to highlight here is the very first blue bar of that section is expansion, water purchase agreement, and CPUC. And what you will find in a later agenda item is we're not going to meet approval, which is shown in this schedule as of June. So let's ignore that for a second. But if you look at the assumption here was PUC approval in June, and then you can go all the way to the end and you see completion in January of 2024. What that means is there's approximately 20 months between approval and completion. And so that's really what we're looking at. Later, when we look at the Public Utilities Commission schedule, you'll see that we're more likely to receive a decision in August or September. So, you know, we'll, at a minimum, add 2 months, at a maximum, add 3 months. And with the caveat that don't believe my hard minimum and maximum, it can always get pushed out further by the PUC. And the other important thing is the period between substantial completion and punch lists is approximately 5 months. So we actually will, or we expect to see water coming out of the expansion sooner than 20 months, but the 20-month period is basically through completion and punch list. So very optimistic that as soon as we get PUC approval, we'll be ready to move quickly on the project. And then you can't move much faster than that because the third section down are the injection wells phase 4, which are deep injection wells 5 and 6, which are needed for the expansion. And they also show completion in that kind of December, January of 2023, 2024 period. So all in, I think we're in pretty good stead on all of that. I
Okay.
did mention, yeah.
Oh,
any quick-
okay, yeah, just slow down just a little bit for me.
Yep.
Let's go back to the wells. Those are the 4 deep injection wells that are going now?
Yes,
Okay, how about those 2 smaller ones? Are they operating too?
they are operating. They contribute, but they don't contribute a lot. We found that the deep injection wells are the workhorses. The shallow wells are functional, and they've got slightly different injection rates. But yeah, they're working. Also, all yeah.
So all 6 wells are working. Okay, thank you. So Dave, like you were going back talking about the CPUC, that schedule is going to be a lengthy one, or do we have to wait for them to complete everything before we can start bugging the state again?
Yeah. So they've broken it in 2 parts, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is all about the water purchase agreement. We will go through that schedule. Phase 2 is about long-term supply and demand needs, which informs whether or not and when a desalination project might be needed for the community. That'll take a little bit longer. Going back to the state then, and acting a little bit on City of Monterey's letter about lifting CDOs so we can get going with housing. In my opinion, as somebody who's dealt with the PUC and dealt with the regulators, I don't think we have a chance to even begin discussion about lifting the CDO until we have let a contract and begun construction for Pure Water Monterey expansion. Because prior to that, it's still a promise and it's not actionable, if you will. So I think while the intent is there, testimony is still coming. There's still questions being raised by certain interveners and so forth. So we have to just wait and see what happens with PUC approval before we have any inkling that we're moving forward on this permanent water supply project. So there are many who would say, well, once you get the approval, it's as good as done. I think as a regulator, I'm more likely to say, well, it's not done till you're building it and finished with it. And I think somewhere in between starting it and finishing it, because it's an add-on to an existing project that's proven to work, we will have the basis for asking to review lifting the CDO sooner than completion. But I don't foresee asking that question until we've let a contract and we've got a contractor out.
Any other, go ahead, Director Rowley.
Phase 1 and phase 2. I know in prior PUC hearings, they make a decision on phase 1, then there's a separate time delay before they make a decision on phase 2. Is this split in a 2-decision structure, or is this all one decision taking both phases?
Dave Laredo, can you answer that? I can't.
Yeah, it's uncertain. It's teed up, so it could be 2 different decisions. So we could get a phase 1 decision, but I think all bets are off here, particularly since it's unclear how cooperative Cal-Am is going to be in terms of where we go.
Yeah, and the only telling remark is on the phase 1 schedule. The last item on the phase 1 schedule is proposed decision within 90 days of the last previous, the item before it, which is
Reply briefs.
reply briefs. So, yeah, so I think it's teed up for a separate decision.
That's how I understood it,
Yeah.
based on the schedule. Yeah.
But I'm reading in this, it sounds like we're starting to talk about water supply now, water demand and supply in that item that y'all gave us. Now, if we are, I think we need to get in front of this and put ours out there. Dave, have you looked at the numbers?
Yeah, so that really is the phase 2 process. What was interesting is the PUC couldn't help themselves, but mentioned supply and demand in both phases. And so the near-term phase is We don't yet have a permanent water supply. We need a permanent water supply. We are short, and we are scrambling to fill the gap. And the best way to fill the gap is with a permanent water supply. So we spoke to current demand and current supply in the phase one, but it didn't call out for, an update to our own adopted water supply and demand study, which
And that elicited a motion to strike by Cal-Am as well. So
yeah, even the near-term stuff elicited a motion to strike. Yeah. So
Okay. All right.
great. The third piece of this item 3 was to discuss a little bit on the tracer test. I'm going to try to simplify it a lot. I'm going to share my
Excuse me, can I go back to the chart?
Yeah.
Quick, the blue line up in the early, right below the one you were talking about with the PUC. The next one says funding.
right.
Are there funding decisions soon coming, done? Can you update us?
Yeah. So, and I think Mike McCullough is listening in on as a attendee. Monterey One Water did get the application in for state revolving fund monies, and also for WIFIA, which is the Federal Water Infrastructure Financing Innovation Act program through the EPA. So both are active. The state revolving fund schedule is longer than expected. So approval there might not mesh with this schedule. They're having quite a bit of interaction with the WIFIA folks, which we've helped a little bit on comments about answering questions about the water purchase agreement and some other things. So as of right now, there's relatively good progress on the WIFIA front, the federal funding front. And then we have talked to investment bankers, as well as we've looked at a lending program out of a federally backed kind of chartered bank. So we're highly confident we'll be ready to go within that month following approval of the water purchase agreement. But we're not sure what path we're going to be on.
And is there any particular legal standing of the signed agreement that Cal-Am has already executed regarding the water purchase agreement compared to what's going on at the PUC?
Right, not really. The MOU was an agreement to agree. So in other words, what it says is if the PUC shall approve the agreement and agree to recovery of the costs and rates, then all three parties intend to sign it. I think ultimately that gave us the comfort that everybody was committed, but it doesn't mean anything with respect to financing. You can't finance off it. So we actually need the approval of the water purchase agreement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, you can move along.
All right, so moving to tracer test work and some of its implications. I'm going to share the screen here. Okay, can everybody see that? So this is the well field near aquifer storage and recovery, going from kind of lower left-hand corner to middle top is General Jim Moore Boulevard. You can see ASR 1 and ASR 2, those are the two existing ASR wells. Peralta is a production well. Ord Grove number 2 is a production well. And then you can also see ASR 3 and 4, which are part of the ASR program. These two wells labeled MW, these are monitoring wells in the pink with the dot in the middle. And then the existing 4 injection wells, DIW 1, 2, 4, and 3. We like keeping it complicated, but this is what you see out there. So this is the base project. It doesn't reflect some new wells for the expansion. So recycled water is kind of premised on a regime that makes sure that it is potable before it enters the drinking water distribution system. So we have what's called an indirect potable reuse program, which means you need an environmental buffer between the injection in an injection well and the extraction in an extraction well. The goal of the environmental buffer, of course, you know, when it was first envisioned was about 6 months, but the actual regulatory minimum is 2 months. And the way you figure out what that is you first model it with computer models based on your understanding of the geology and the slopes, the anticlines of your strata, and what you expect to happen, you know, based on some assumed transmissivity in the ground and so forth. And so, excuse me. So what you do is you model, so here are those deep injection wells again, in the center of the red zones, right? And you model travel paths of what would happen with injection. And that's what these squiggly kind of octopus arms are. These are perceived travel paths between these 4 deep injection wells, kind of centered in the red areas, to the various extraction wells. So Ord Grove over on the left, and Peralta, and ASR3 and ASR4, and then ASR1 and ASR2 sit right in the middle of it all. So that's called an intrinsic tracer test study. It's all done with modeling, but we also then followed up with an extrinsic tracers test. And what these travel times are doing is they're ensuring that there's enough of residency or time in the ground before it hits the extraction point, so that you're highly confident that all viruses have been removed and all other potential water quality issues have been resolved. So we performed an extrinsic tracer test. That's where dye is actually added to the water at the injection well sites. And then you get more accurate travel times because you actually you witness the physical dye at an extraction point, first at monitoring wells and then at a production well. And then you're able to recalibrate your model based on this actual physical evidence. And as you can imagine, projected performance and actual physical performance sometimes do and sometimes don't line up really well. And so you don't really know what's in the ground until you get a chance to test it. Otherwise, it's you know, just sitting on top of the ground, so forth. So we've now had success with the extrinsic tracer test. And this is just kind of an example of what you're seeing. So here's, you know, all the dye goes down in a well in a slug. And then the further away you get from the injection well, this is the left-hand side. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving. But over time, it begins to spread out where there's a diffuse initial contact point and then a significant high level of concentration. And then it begins to reduce and then it attenuates back to zero dye. And so that's kind of, you know, think of it as, it's not quite a normal distribution, but you've got a leading edge which arrives before the peak, and then eventually it all dissipates and it moves away. So this is, you know, just dye running through the aquifer. We had looked at trying to run ASR #1 as a production well. However, the application that was made to the Division of Drinking Water for regulatory compliance utilized the Peralta well as the point of compliance, or the regulatory compliance point. So trying to use ASR1 for summer peaking would be kind of moving into that. If you remember the graph before, it's a little more fully in the mix. And so there was some concern that you didn't want to undermine the 2-month minimum travel time. Now I can tell you the results of the extrinsic tracer test is over 4 months to the regulatory compliance point, Peralta well. So we look really good to that production well. But there's some concern that trying to turn on ASR1 for production might imperil the minimum 2-month retention time. And there's some modeling work that shows that, in fact, it could become very, very close and, in fact, imperil that point. You could use all 4 of these deep injection wells to kind of moderate, put more water in at deep injection wells 3 and 4 and less in at 1 and 2. And we'll talk just a little bit about that in a second. So there are ways to make ASR1 work, but there are some concerns with the regulators and some concerns with us as the public agency partners, which we'll talk a little bit more in a second. And so, talking about what you would do. So if ASR1 is not extracting, then you're really, again, looking at the wells, ASRs 3 and 4, Peralta and Ord Grove over here. But in order to get ASR1 extracting, you would have to reduce the injection rates at 1 and 2 significantly, kind of half or less than what they're capable of doing. So the conclusions were that the physical extrinsic tracer study confirmed the intrinsic modeled effort. Travel time at ASR1 depends on injection rates at DIW1 and DIW2 and the extraction rate. And it's a difficult math equation to solve, but there's definite dependency. And so ASR1's role in production comes into question based on what we've seen from the tracer test. That's it for this discussion. But I just wanted this committee to know that, that's the type of work that gets done to confirm your initial planning work. And we have confirmed the modeling through the physical work. And as I said, the project is working beautifully. The travel time to the Peralta well is well in excess of the regulatory minimum, which is good. But that desire to use ASR1 as a production well is called into question. And that's kind of it on the update of Pure Water Monterey based project. And I'll field any questions.
Go ahead, Dad.
Two questions. One, you can manage around that for the moment because you can, but I hate to see the injection slow down. If we don't need the water precisely, I know we need it in the long term, but I would like to see more water going in sooner rather than if we can delay the extraction, that would be helpful, I think.
Yes. And under the next item, I'm going to confirm that I agree with you.
Okay. And the other question, which is more general, I thought the state was considering eliminating the indirect potable requirement at some point, and I just didn't know where that discussion was at all.
Right, and that's spot on. They have not promulgated regulations yet for direct potable reuse. There's some belief that what you would do is on the path to the distribution system that you would have some form of reservoir that could handle like 3 days or 3 separate reservoirs, one for each day, if you can do rapid testing, so that you would never put water into the system if you haven't fully tested. So some of the testing has to get faster. But yeah, no regulations have been promulgated, which goes back a little bit to that concern about using ASR number 1, because the Division of Drinking Water looks at that and they say, hey, we're fine with 4.5 months over at Peralta. That's great. But if you're telling me that you've got some operating regime where certain months of the year you're going to dial back on your injection to ensure that you've got more than 2 months of travel time to ASR as a production well, they've said we have concerns. We need to look at this. We're not sure how to write a permit for this. they've also said if you want to make that change for your point of compliance from Peralta to ASR1, we may have to put you in the back of the line for our review because that's a change from what you've already submitted. They've also said if we're not highly confident as your regulator that it's way in excess of 2 months, we may have to treat you as direct potable reuse.
Whoops.
And now we've just come full circle. There are no promulgated regs. So the reaction of the regulator would be, we don't have any regs. So turn the whole thing down until we evaluate it. And that would be really bad for performance guarantees and delivery.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to have an asterisk in our permit, so.
Bingo. Bingo.
But Dave, I think I heard Monterey One, they are looking at direct portable use. If they're looking at it.
Yeah.
So would that trust test mean something? And another thing, is it good that that the water is going in the ground and we're not catching that tracer right off the bat?
Yeah, it is good. Yeah, the tracer study for everything that we've done apart from ASR well number 1 looks great, looks absolutely great. And, you know, all the work on Pure Water Monterey expansion and the study of extraction capacity that went into that back in 2018, you know, everything signaled that we, and I'm using the collective we now, that CalAm could have used more extraction capacity in that area. But the work that went into the SEIR said eventually with expansion, ASR1 will no longer be available as a production well. And what we've learned based on the geology that we've now seen with the physical tests is it's just happening sooner. We've all expected ASR1 to go away as a production well with the full development of the injection field. But as I said, it's just happening a little faster.
And my next question is, John, when are people going to start tasting that water? You know, I use bottled water myself, but when is that change is going to come that people get it out of their tap? You know, showers and baths.
Can't taste it. It tastes just as good as any other water in there.
Well,
Yeah, it's in the system and it's hit the system. So there's, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if CalAm have, but you can bring this up to them. Have they sent something out that the new water is here? You know, I think the public should be informed, or we can do it if they're okay with you, that you could do it. That, you know, hey, the recycled water is in the system now completely coming out of the taps. So people won't.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on you just a little bit because I don't think we need to highlight it. It's
Okay.
just run of the mill. It's actually it's so good that it's probably better than some of the water we've had coming off the river seasonally. And so things, you know, especially for the folks that are kind of in old Monterey, you know, some parts of the year you get more seaside water and you can't get any Carmel River water. Now that we've got the Monterey pipeline, there are seasonal differences in the mixture of water in the CalAm system in various locations. And I don't think we can really keep up with it. So, you know, as long as all the water quality requirements are being met, it's a different mix if you're in Seaside than it is if you're in Old Monterey, than it is if you're kind of in Pacific Grove or up the valley, depending on the time of year. So, so I don't want to say, you know, like, ooh, you know, this new scary water, it's not scary anymore because we figure out how to do it and make it as good or better than the water that we've had in there before.
So Mr. Laredo, will we be okay? Because if I'm going to sue, I'm going to sue everybody if I can, if got the money. That's what we're going through now. So tell me, are we all right? Or you know, we leave that up to CalAm.
I believe we have a one water philosophy, so I'm not sure how a suit can be brought. But the bottom line is, as CalAm makes every point, they believe that we're not in the retail water delivery business. This is CalAm's water, and they're delivering it.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think if there was ever some sort of water quality issue, then certainly public outreach would be needed to kind of describe what happened, how it happened, and how it's going to get fixed. But so far, so good. Before we move on from this topic, Mike McCullough has reminded me that the Vedos wells, or the two other less deep, shallow wells,
Yeah,
are doing about 7 acre-feet per month. So pretty minor contribution out of the total. And then he wanted to remind me that the extrinsic, if I didn't make it as clear as I thought I did, the extrinsic tracer test results make the model so much more robust. It's the model is great because, once you're able to modify your model parameters based on real data, it only gets that much better. So,
all
that
right.
concludes this item.
Hold it. Go ahead there, Chair Paul.
So I realize this is the challenge. If because of the constraints on using ASR 1 as an extraction well, if that has to be done, can we meet the demand with a combination of all sources available?
That is a really good question. And items 1 through 7 on this agenda are all linked kind of with that question in mind. So let me answer it when we get into the probably item 6 and the next item as well. There is more to say on ASR well number 1. So thanks for asking it. I'll answer forthcoming.
Any other questions? If none,
We'll move on.
Joel, let's check with the public and see any questions up to now. Or Dave, do you want to complete it and then ask, or?
No, we'll take questions.
Yeah, just check out there and see, do we have any comments or questions up to now?
Okay, so if you would like to make public comment on this matter, please raise your hand. Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll return this back to the committee.
Okay, thank you. All right, Dave, go ahead.
So item 4 is discussion about the parallel pipeline and a little more info on ASR well number 1. John Lear, if you could give the committee an update on the parallel pipeline and what you're seeing there.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Committee, good afternoon. The parallel pipeline has been installed into General Jim Moore and is currently being tied into the rest of the system. There was a supply decision that was made because the valving that was going to be used to tie the parallel pipeline into the system was on a supply delay, like much things are these days. So spools instead of valves were chosen to move forward with the tie-in work so it could be completed. I'm waiting to hear that the tie-in has been completed. I see them working physically on the spots in the trenches where the spools are going to be currently installed. I witnessed that myself this morning. So we're expecting to hear shortly that the pipeline has been is completed and has been hooked to the rest of the system. At that point in time, the pipeline would be pressurized, tested, chlorinated, and then would be ready for use. So we're close and we've made some decisions to move forward in a way that will get it available to us sooner than later if we were to wait for all of the parts. So
Okay, I seen them down there working. So where is the water going to come from that they're going to use to do all that? The flushing and sanitizing, and where that water is going to come from?
likely will come from the system and fill the pipe. And what you usually do is you put chlorine. I don't know the plan, if this is the plan, but you usually put chlorine tablets into the pipe and you fill it with water and you let it pressurize and you let it sit, and then you will dechlorinate it upon water leaving the pipeline, and it will go into the backflush pit and will seep back into the groundwater system.
Okay, are we going to have water going down Hillby?
No, not for that action. There would not be water moving in that direction.
Would you
Okay.
like some?
No, I don't want to hear the complaints that we got water leaking down the street. They sure enough love to call
They'll call
And
you
I-
first.
me.
Yep.
Yeah, call me first for me to go out there and I go out there and look. And they come from the Cal-Am tanks and people wonder why. Okay, we can move on.
Yeah, the other piece of this was a little more discussion on ASR well number 1 extraction capacity. Because, you know, the parallel pipeline and ASR 1 and 2 are designed to help work together so that we could, you know, for example, extract at ASR 3 and inject at ASR 1. John, I don't know, can we do the vice versa with the parallel pipeline? And, you know, ignoring everything we just said about extraction at ASR 1, but could you extract at ASR 1 and inject at ASR 3 with the parallel pipeline?
I think I would have to maybe ask Maureen. She's looked at these valves a lot more than I have.
You can, there's a removable spool that you just put back in place.
Yeah. So again, talking about, you know, again, the reason behind all this was to kind of maximize that part of the system so that injection and extraction could be happening at the same time. And I guess unluckily, but luckily for us, we've had no opportunity for injections since we shut down in January, because we haven't had sufficient rains to trigger injection, you know, meet the in-stream flow requirements. So while all this was taking place, we've been unable to inject and we've had no water to inject. So I guess that's the good part of the sad precipitation issue. If it does rain in April and in May, we'll be in a position to do some injection because of that pipeline at the same time as some extraction. But long term, you know, there's no dechlorination facilities, and the regional board determined, I guess it was regional board, correct, John, that we don't need dechlorination facilities. Or was that DDW?
It was in the regional board. We in our permit we recently enrolled in for the injection of drinking water. The regional board recognized in that permit that the disinfection byproduct in growth process was a localized phenomenon that happened just underneath our sites and was not traveling off the sites. And it was decided that dechlorination was not required.
Right. So going back then to the ASR 1 discussion, if it were to ever be used as a production well, you would still need to shut it down for 2 months prior to its use to make sure that all disinfection byproducts have been negated, if you will. But the parallel pipeline is there. It's, you know, ready this week, pretty much, maybe next week. If it does rain, we've got some opportunity. But at the end of the day, this whole issue of ASR 1 as a production well comes back to helicopters going again. You know, water deliveries are going to be crucial for the near term. We're going to discuss that under item 6. And, you know, pure water Monterey, any new ASR during a Christmas year, I mean,
You're muted, Dave.
yeah, I just wanted the helicopter noise to go down.
Oh.
It's funny, we joke because it starts at my office and it finishes at John's office. So you get to hear it, the Doppler effect. So here's one of the issues. You know, we're going to be tight until a permanent water supply is added. And let's say that permanent water supply is Pure Water Monterey expansion. Best case, 20 months out from whenever the water purchase agreement is approved and signed. So, you know, let's continue to say we're minimum of 24, maybe 30 months out. For that 30-month period, all water is crucial for meeting the needs of this community without violating either the CDO or the Seaside Basin adjudication. Pure Water Monterey and any new ASR water, should it rain, any additional Pure Water Monterey water, by running the plant harder, the plant itself could be run harder than we've been running it, because we've been constrained by injection capacity. With the 2 new wells coming online, we could actually move up towards the full capacity of the advanced water purification facility and inject more water, providing extra water to Cal-Am beyond their contractual requirement. At some point here, hopefully this year, might be August, the waste discharge permit, which controls how much water can be injected during a calendar year, will be raised, which will also help leverage the new capacity of the deep injection well number 3 and 4. So much about meeting the next 30 months to 3 years of regulatory compliance depends on getting a bunch of water in, as we'll see when we talk about section 6. Any regime to operate ASR 1 as a production well requires us to back off of injection at the injection field, which runs counter to the whole idea of trying to run Pure Water Monterey at a higher capacity to get extra water to fully fill our operating reserve, to fully leverage any ASR water that goes in, or the existing bank. The existing bank is a little over 1,300, or it might be 1,360 acre feet that's sitting there. So the water is going to be there, but how we're going to get it out is really the issue. So if it's a production capacity constraint, then making water available through ASR 1 runs the risk of jeopardizing the permit processing. I mentioned earlier, we could fall to the end of the line with that change. It might be viewed as direct potable reuse, as I mentioned, with no regs. So we run the risk of shutting down the whole program. Reducing injection could result in default of our performance guarantees of the 3,500, and certainly 3,500. If that became the limit, we wouldn't be able to deliver excess Pure Water Monterey water, which has been a goal during this period prior to a permanent water supply. And it could impact the ASR, the ability to inject should it rain and withdraw in a current year. So, I think we've got some real thinking to do, but I think at this point we need to focus on alternatives to ASR 1 as a production well, and that's where the working group will kind of focus its energy, I expect. But that's all I have to report at this point. That it's still kind of in progress.
Well, Dave, you mentioned some things that we're trying to get an extra 20 acre feet, I think it is, for housing. If we bump up the plant to run a little bit harder, can we get that 20 acre feet out of there so we can say, hey, we just asking for 20 acre feet. The plant is pumping that 20 acre feet extra for that housing. Can we have that?
Right.
That's my point of pushing ahead, but let's hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, and it's not just the extra running of Pure Water Monterey. If we can demonstrate that there's extra water in the system, that's gravy. In that, then you could say if we're actually pumping it, we have it, we can point to it. And that's really where we want to be. We want to say there's more than enough water to meet the CDO, to meet the adjudication. It's tight, we know it's tight, but the other piece of this whole water for housing issue is what we're really looking for is selective non-enforcement of condition 2, because it'll take 2 years to build a housing project. You design it, you entitle it, you start building it. By the time you're ready to turn on that tap, you'll know whether you've got a permanent water supply project moving forward anyway. So at that point, you're able to say, well, hey, don't worry about it long term. We have way more than enough water. But here short term, as we demonstrated, we've got enough water to meet the requirements. And so it'll be maybe 20 extra acre feet. And what we're really trying to get out of Pure Water Monterey is an extra 400 to 500 acre feet per year. And when you add up all these other little opportunities, especially if we had a normal year, not another dry year, then your table 13 water rights kick in and so forth. But yes, your point is all these other sources where we can cobble together water, if we can show that there's at least 20 extra acre feet, hopefully more, so that there's a factor of safety, that would provide the comfort to the state board, as well as they should get some comfort knowing that this is more a matter of signaling to an investor that there's not going to be an after the fact enforcement if you commit to funding this housing project. Because the real impacts of that housing project aren't going to come online for a couple of years. So, yeah.
So how long would it take to put a timeline that when we can do that together? Where where we actually putting together, bumping up the plan a little bit, the wells are going, which are in place. When can we put a timeline for that and try to push that forward? Mr. Laredo, will we have a problem with doing that with the state, going that route?
I say, when you say, do we have a problem with that?
Well, will we have a problem putting it to the state?
We don't have a problem putting it to state. I'm not sure that we'll get traction there.
Yeah, I think it's a two-step process. And Senator Laird's office, I think it was the first week of March, did ask for a workshop with the state on this housing issue. So step one is to kind of show them that what we're asking is a de minimis, no impact amount of water, and it's not going to really happen for a couple of years. What we're looking for is a promise that you won't enforce condition 2. They don't have to be entirely convinced, and this is where I think the City of Monterey letter may have asked for too much. We don't have to convince them to lift the CDO today. And I don't think we have enough bread in our bread basket to give them to lift the CDO today. That we really do need to get to the point where we now have approval for a permanent water supply. And again, assuming that's Pure Water Monterey expansion, we're not going to be in that position for several months. And then once signatures go on that, and once construction bids are let, then it's a real project. And then you can point to a real project. And that's where we get into, a risk assessment on, will the water be there? Does it matter if the water's there, if it's only 20 acre feet or 40 acre feet and so forth? So I think it's going to be a two-step process in trying to get them to listen to us for housing.
Well, I like for you, and they have to go through the board, but start working on the two-step process that we can let this public know, we got into this housing water, you know how I feel about water for other things than just what they want to use it for. So we in it, so let's try to work our way into it, try to help Monterey out.
Yep.
Let them know we're trying to do something. Chair Paul, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah, wouldn't we have a better chance of a good outcome on that if we had that workshop after we get after CPUC approves the water purchase agreement? I know that means waiting, and it's very frustrating, but I'm thinking that the outcome might be better if we waited. What do you think, Dave Laredo and Dave Stolt?
Well, I think it would be, but I think that we're over a year behind our formal ask, and we had no water purchase agreement in sight at that time. So I think that it's been asked for, and if we're given the opportunity, we take it, because it's been so hard to get their attention. And if we have to have to tell them we'll have an even better answer or presentation in 4 or 5 months. But I think we take it. There's a lot to be said about water availability for housing right now. And, you know, I know that Cal-Am will have cold feet. They had cold feet when we originally submitted our application, saying, whoa, you know, it's going to be tight. Anything like this could, you know, push us over the edge. Therefore, we're not really in support of it. I think we're back to that question of, will 4 housing projects that are kind of on the books actually push anybody over the edge? And the answer is really no. But you have to, you know, you actually have to sit there and look at it and figure out, you know, how much water are we talking about? And what we're going to talk about under item 6 is going to make you think, well, maybe it's a bigger ask than it really is. I don't think it's that big of an ask, but the results of item 6 might make you think that. So.
Okay.
Go ahead there, George.
One follow-up on the relationship between Pure Water expansion and the, Pure Water Monterey and the expansion, the two together. There's been a number of references to overproducing the water, producing an excess beyond, you're pushing it a little harder. Does the fact that those two projects as coexisting, does that interfere at all with the idea of overproducing? Does the expansion really take up some of the capacity that was expected in the pushing the original project harder or not? I'm just asking about the relationship.
Yeah, good question. There is capacity in the current base plant designed to deliver approximately 600 acre-feet to Marina Coast Water District. But even beyond that, there is excess capacity in the plant. I think it's a 5 million gallon per day plant right now. It's typically been maxed out at about 4. And then in recent weeks, they've been able to run it greater than 4. They've played with, I don't know, Maureen, what you know, but I think they've gotten it up to about 4.5 MGD for a short period of time. But the idea is you can, I don't know, do you have any numbers on that, Maureen, that you can share? Or is that close enough?
Yeah, I talked with Jose, their plant superintendent, and they can do 4 to 4.2 for a fairly sustained period, upwards of that for shorter periods of time if we needed to do some catch up. Yeah,
so it has this, you know, stated capacity. They've been playing with trying to increase it. You know, obviously the March results required it to run higher than it had in the past. So it's been running over 4. But the expansion is in and of itself. So the expansion does not include using up some of this current excess capacity.
Does not, okay.
Does not. And so Marina Coast Water District accounts for some of the excess capacity. And then there is still excess capacity that will not be gobbled up by the expansion. So there are chance opportunities in there once they really figure out what the plant is capable of doing, of running at a more sustained higher output, which is, you know, kind of the goal is to put it through its paces and see what it's capable of doing without blowing it up, you know, so to speak. But, you know, Marina Coast has said they may be ready to take irrigation water this calendar year. That kind of remains to be seen. So we haven't really counted on it for this year. So we'd love to take as much of that and get it in the ground so we can, at a minimum, increase our operating reserve on our dollar, or, you know, be prepared to front load some water that will get consumed later in the next water year, which is something we've talked about, where the district may act a little bit as a bank to get as much water in the ground in the spring, so that when Marina Coast has its needs and Cal-Am has its needs in the summer months, they're competing with each other a little bit. So if we can front run, again, maybe on the district's dime, But if we recover that money within the same fiscal year, or at a minimum within a similar time period, that we're not building a huge bank at our expense to serve others. But we're going to have to start looking at that kind of balancing of these competing summer demands by putting more water in the ground earlier, which means run the plant harder beyond what's needed in January, February, March. And we're still learning. We're in our, we've basically had 2 years, almost 2 years of operations, but we haven't had Marina Coast on yet, and we haven't had these competing uses, and we haven't had this absolute need for excess production. So we're still learning a little bit.
Yeah, it takes time to figure out what the system can do and what you can rely on it to do.
Yeah. So I think that kind of summarizes this item. I don't see any hands up from the public. Joel, if you want to go out.
Yeah, so if you would like to make public comment on this matter, please raise your hand. Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I return this back to the committee.
Okay, what's the next item there, GM?
Yeah, so the next item is talking specifically about the expansion and two kind of outstanding issues. The first is the water purchase agreement, and the second is that letter from Marina Coast Water District and the response by California American Water that was included in your packet regarding extraction wells 1 and 2. With that, I'm going to share my screen and talk about both of these issues. Oh, and I just somehow lost it. So let's see, what did I do? Oh, my bad.
Is it the letters you're looking for?
No,
That
I
we
have
have in our packet?
something related to the letters, but I just inadvertently closed it instead of expanding it. So let me go back here and share that. Huh. Well, doesn't come up on my shareable. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Terrific. So here's the schedule for the water purchase agreement. And here we are between April 1st and April 8th. So on April Fool's Day, we all submitted a bunch of testimony. Hopefully it was all truthful and not an April Fool's joke. And so what we're looking at now is we're coming pretty close to the end of testimony. There will be rebuttal testimony by the company, by California American, to the supplemental testimony that was submitted by the interveners on Friday. There was also some additional testimony submitted by Cal-Am, this rebuttal testimony on April 1st. But April 8th is it. And so then we see where we stand April 8th, and that will perhaps be an opportunity for the parties to agree or disagree on whether testimony, whether a hearing, an evidentiary hearing is necessary. If it is, it would be this first week of May, excuse me. And then based on all of that, there'd be opening briefs and reply briefs. And what the administrative law judges told us is that a proposed decision would be 90 days within the reply briefs, which means September roughly with hearings, or August without. Chances are, if it's truly 90 days, then it would probably roll to October with hearings and September without, if everything holds. So that's what we're looking at. That's your, in my mind, that's your certainty at that point that you can move forward with the expansion, even though, apart from the business coalition everybody says do the expansion. The testimony to date is do the expansion. Some of it has been overwhelmingly supportive. Some of it has been underwhelmingly supportive, but generally speaking, it's all been supportive. So we're really hopeful that during meet and confer, we'll be able to call collectively, and my hope is to move forward without a hearing on the evidence, but we'll see. But either way, it's this 90 days following the reply briefs, which is going to control that blue bar back in the calendar we looked at earlier. The next item I want to talk about is extraction wells 1 and 2. So you saw the letter in your packet from Marina Coast Water District. You saw Cal-Am's response. I have told Rem Scherzinger that our attitude is that the adjudication itself protects rights of standard producers, which is Cal-Am, to enter into storage and recovery agreements within the Seaside Basin. Marina Coast has recognized that it has no rights to drill wells in the Seaside Basin. So its ordinance, which prohibits wells other than district wells, has no effect in this Seaside Basin. So it's an ordinance throughout their service area, and they annexed all the way up to Co Avenue in their last LAFCO proceeding that began in 2019. So yes, the ordinance exists. We've also stated that our district interests were protected by the adjudication. Specifically in the Superior Court decision, it says the district's rights to store water separate from the water master are protected, and the district's jurisdiction crosses over the same area. So we have two resource managers with authority, and we believe that we can drill wells without asking permission of Marina Coast, and we can proxy to a third party like Cal-Am to drill wells. So I think it all remains somewhat up in the air, but I've begun to understand a little bit better of what the issue might be. And if I can take a minute to just describe what's going on. So this is General Jim Moore Boulevard. The golf course that you see right under the legend and below, that's Bayonet and Black Horse. This is a reservoir that can serve Bayonet and Black Horse. And here are extraction wells number 1 and extraction well number 2 as scoped in the Supplemental Environmental Impact Report and subject of that Marina Coast Water District letter.
Is that Co Avenue right at the very bottom?
Yes, this is Co Avenue here, and this is probably, is it eucalyptus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dave, just going back, are those wells on the school property?
They are. And, we'd have to go through the same thing we went through for these two, Aquifer Storage and Recovery 3 and 4.
Yes. And so who's going to be doing the negotiation for the school, the district, or I mean, for that property?
Yeah, it would likely be Cal-Am because they're going to own and operate these wells, and it'll be our job to kind of keep pushing the schedule to make sure it's happening. But that's what they did with ASR 3 and 4 as well. They negotiated straight with the schools. And the schools
but I remember I just had to go up there and tell that school board just about, hey, you're hammering us.
Yeah.
The cost of those wells, they're going to hammer us. And those are the school district and us, we're the same customers.
Well, and interesting. So in the case of these wells, the ASR wells, the schools deal with the state architect and not with their local planning departments, generally speaking. And so all of the discussion about this really didn't have to include the city, and to some extent did not include the city. And the city may not have been as happy as they could be. And then the reason this got more expensive for us, or at least created problems, is this is an upward gradient from the school building. And so it was deemed to be a dam, subject to the Department of Safety of Dams regulation. And to make a backflush pit work, we would have had to reinforce with concrete and so forth. And so we just elected to move all of its backflush down to the Santa Margarita site. But yes, once again, this would be dealing with the schools and less with the city.
Mhm.
But let me explain where some of the concern arises. This is a little more close in. Again, here's General Jim Moore, here's the golf course, here's the middle school, what we were looking at before. But now here's Co Avenue. And Co Avenue takes a right-hand turn, it comes in. And this is the Co Avenue well. And this well, as best we understand it, and John, if I'm wrong, jump in, but we understand that this well supplies the golf course. And I believe it's a shallow well in the Paso Robles, not a deep well in the Santa Margarita. And again, not hearing John jump in, I'm doing okay so far. Further down the road, down General Jim Moore, is Seaside Muni well number 4, which produces water for the small Seaside Municipal water service area. My understanding is that Campus Town project only has so much water, approximately half of what they need, coming from Marina Coast Water District's allocation from the Army for the benefit of Seaside. And if they really want to do the whole Campus Town project, they're going to need more water. So there's talk of an exchange between the Seaside Municipal System and Marina Coast Water District, where Seaside would produce water into the Marina Coast Water District distribution system and General Jim Moore, and essentially wheel it north to the Campus Town project to serve that remaining piece of Campus Town for which there's no identified source of water.
Can you show me where the Campus Town development will be?
Yeah, if I can, it's even further north than here.
Okay.
It's kind of the Seaside boundary with CSUMB.
Uh-huh.
So there will be services, residential, Campus Town.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be a couple of bars and restaurants and so forth, but they're trying to, in effect, create a Campus Town setting for the university
Mhm.
on that kind of northern Seaside border. I don't have a good map of it.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's enough.
So if they're going to do this exchange and they actually put Seaside water into the pipeline, there's not enough capacity at Seaside Municipal well number 4, which is also primarily a shallow well. It may be screened a little bit in the Santa Margarita, but it's primarily in the Paso Robles again. So if there's not enough capacity and they need to build a new well to produce this Seaside water coming from the Seaside allocation under the Seaside adjudication, they might need to drill a new well. And one of those potential locations would be back here at this Co Avenue location where the property is available. And if this Co Avenue well is no longer serving the golf course, because the golf course is now being served by Marina Coast's allocation of pure water Monterey water, then a new well at this Co Avenue location could then go up into the potable water distribution system of Marina Coast, get to Campus Town, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the concern is if we're putting extraction wells 1 and 2 at this boundary of the school and the golf course, will there be interference or complications with a new well here at Co Avenue or at some other location that might serve Seaside's exchange with Marina Coast? Our initial reaction is no, it's far enough away. Our secondary reaction is the Muni wells are shallow wells in the Paso Robles, and if the intent is to just put another well in the Paso Robles to serve, these wells are going to be in the Santa Margarita, which is deeper, then they may not have any cross interaction. So I think there's a lot of science still yet to be done. There were no objections by Marina Coast Water District during the SEIR comment period, the draft and final. So suffice to say, we've taken the position that we can do what we want to do at this location. Cal-Am's taken a similar position in their reply letter. And I just want you to be aware of the issue. Having to move extraction well 1 and 2 could potentially create a delay in the pure water Monterey expansion, which is something we don't want to happen. So we are open to alternatives if there's no delay, but we're not willing to, add a year or 18 months to the expansion if we don't have to.
But Dave, have we put anything in writing yet? I
No.
see the letter from Marina Coast, Cal-Am. When are we going to develop a letter and say those things that you just told us, that we are going to protect our rights in the Seaside Basin?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to mention that to the Seaside City Council. We've been talking about the Highlands over there, and if there's going to be any changes, we need to tell them there's not going to be any changes because this is where we're going to go.
Yep.
I'm going to talk to them Thursday at their city council meeting on the redistricting, and
Yeah, I wouldn't speak on this issue yet. We're waiting on a report to come out, and I've suddenly forgotten the name of the consulting firm, but there is a consulting firm working on this exchange and how it might work, and I want to see what their proposed solution is. So right now, it's just an idea that we're kind of complaining about, or they're complaining about to us, and we're rejecting. But I want to see what their physical solution is, and that's due to land like yesterday. So I think
yes, and let's get on top of it because we don't want no delays. Now I know Marina Coast probably love the delay, but we don't need any delays. So you and Mr. Laredo need to work something up, and let's start giving it to them.
Yeah, as soon as we see what the physical proposal is, then we'll be able to write that letter. But or we could do it now and just say, it doesn't matter what your proposal says, we're going to exert our rights. I'm not sure.
As long as we're going on the record, Dave, that's all I want to do is go on the record.
I hear you. All right,
So,
we'll do that. I think we can do that right away, and then we can say, once we learn more, we'll be able to address it with science.
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. And that concludes this agenda item. And
We'll take it out to the public. So if you would like to make public comment on this item, please raise your hand. Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll return this back to the committee.
Okay, any question from the board? The committee on that issue? If not, let's move along, Dave.
great. This takes us to item 6, which is how the heck are we going to meet the near-term water needs? And I'm going to once again share the screen so we can look at the same table that was in your packet. This is just a summary and kind of a slightly different way of looking at availability versus need. These first 3 are what I call firm supply. These are the known sources from the Carmel River, 3376 acre feet a year. Seaside Basin, 1474. And keep in mind, when we're looking at the short term, we're talking about prior to the CDO being lifted, prior to any Cal-Am Seaside Groundwater Basin in lieu recharge program. So there's a goal to set aside 700 acre feet per year of not pumping or in lieu recharge in the Seaside Basin. For the near term, this does not include any of that set aside. So it's the full Seaside Basin allotment for Cal-Am of 1,474. And then the firm contractual obligation of Pure Water Monterey of 3,500, creating a total firm supply of 8,350. The 5-year average customer demand is 9,725 acre feet. It's been lower in recent years. 96 to 9,700 is probably where we're at right now. And our demand number will differ from 2 other numbers you may see. There is a posting to the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project website that CalAm does monthly, which is also their production for customer service. They tend to measure that kind of after the iron removal plant, at the wall of the Sand City desal plant and at the wellhead, or after treatment, perhaps, if there's treatment losses at some of the smaller treatment facilities. We measure at all of the sites of production. So ours is kind of like how much water has to go into the system before treatment losses, distribution system losses, and so forth. And so our number will actually be a little higher than their reported numbers on their website. And then there's also consumption numbers. Sometimes I come to you with the pie charts of who's using water and how. That's actually metered end use consumption. And so all the treatment losses and all the distribution system losses or line losses are excluded from the consumption numbers. So what we use is basically the full-blown production at the water source for delivery to customer service. So you're going to see, as I said, some differences, but let's take it face value, 97.25 as how much is needed. And so what that means is, hey, to lift the CDO or not violate the CDO is probably what this should say. For the next 2.5 to 3 years, we need to find 1,375 acre feet per year. So where's that going to come from? Well, we talked a little bit about if it rains, you get more additional ASR injection, which hopefully now we're poised to do with the parallel pipeline, even if production is happening in the same zone. You have Sand City desalination, which is not reflected in the firm supply. You've got running Pure Water Monterey harder, which we've already talked about, can get you, a few hundred acre feet. You have Table 13 water rights, which also depend on rain, ASR in real time. And then you have the ASR bank, which is currently at about 1,361 acre feet. There's some carryover credits on the Seaside Basin that CalAm has that represent water that could be pumped. The unutilized Malpaso entitlement is water that can be pumped. And we're presently looking into one other entitlement that perhaps could be rented or leased to CalAm for a couple of years for a couple hundred acre feet. But not quite ready for prime time, so I'm not going to say any more about it. But the issue is you've got to find an additional 1,375. We know that in normal years, over a long horizon, that aquifer storage and recovery is slated to produce 1,300 acre feet per year. But we haven't been running it that long, and we've now had 2 relatively dry years. And when I say not running it long, we've run it since the early 2000s. But until recently, we've always run it to have water that goes in a year and a water year come out in the same water year. So we haven't built up the bank. And it wasn't until Pure Water Monterey came online that we started prioritizing Pure Water Monterey water ahead of ASR water. So we maintained the bank, that 1,361 acre feet that's sitting there right now. So ostensibly, if you were short 300 acre feet a year, you could go 3 years pulling it out of the ASR bank, which gives us some comfort, except for the earlier discussed constraint on extraction capacity. So what we have going on right now is supplies are tight. We don't think that they're not going to be there for next year and the year after, but we're concerned about how you access them, how you get them out of the ground, since there's such a reliance on water either produced from or stored in the north. So, but anyway, that's how the short-term needs look. I believe that for the current water year, we're fine. For next water year, there is sufficient water available, and we just need to focus on the extraction capacity issue. And I'm still feeling somewhat optimistic that if we can get one normal water year, maybe next year, then all of this goes away because we'll have ASR and Table 13 water rights. But we're eyeing the extraction capacity very carefully. So that's the near-term issue. And this is the way it's going to be until a new water supply like Pure Water Monterey expansion comes online. And once that happens, then we can start looking at the in lieu recharge and others. And that concludes this item. I don't know if there's anybody from the public, Joel.
Yes, so if you would like to make public comment on this item, please raise your hand. Chair Edwards, Dave, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll return this back to the committee.
Thank you. Dave, my only comment on this, you need to do this in your water supply report that you give to the board at regular scheduled meeting, so we can understand. Now, on one hand, we're still pushing for that, water for housing. On the other hand, we're looking at this as, well, we're barely making it. So we need to come up with something that, you know, we either stop asking for water for housing and get the project online, or what?
Yep.
Which way we need to go, you need to put it down.
Yeah, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is, it seems counterintuitive that, boy, if we're this tight, and we're this close, why would we be asking for a little bit of relief for housing? And that goes back to the issue, and I'll be honest, I did tell Hans and the mayor of Monterey, I said, well, I used to be more confident making this case if we'd have one regular winter, because then I'd know that the ASR bank would be up and the Table 13 water rights would have been up, and there would be a little more breathing room. But it definitely comes back to, if this makes you nervous, then maybe it's not the time to ask. But I don't think this should make you overly nervous. We're on the edge, but I think that there is sufficient supply. And then it goes back to that practical issue of, if the state board were to say, go ahead up to 50 acre feet, we're not going to do selective enforcement on the increase in use and an existing service connection for affordable housing. All that does is say, Mr. Developer, you now have our promise, we're not going to enforce on you, go ahead and build your project. And again, that project doesn't actually come home to roost for 2 years, because you got to permit it and build it, and then you can turn it on. So,
Well, Dave, one of my comments on this again is, if we put the plant and everything that we've been saying, pumping the plant harder, putting water in the ground, if we put all those things forward, I wouldn't mind going for this. But if we're not going to put it all into a package where we can give it to the state, this is what we are doing, this is how it's acting, I don't want to go forward with it, with the water for housing. If you put in this scenario, but you telling me all those things behind what you just told me, you know, we need a good plan.
we
So
do.
if you put together a good plan and bring it to the board, you know, let the seven of us decide, yay or nay. And then we had that, you know, we finally had that discussion, but that's where I'm at, so.
Yep, no, understood. And it, you know, staff still has some work to do with respect to extraction capacity and what's capable, especially now that we're leaning to saying ASR 1 is not available. It puts too much at risk, too much at jeopardy in the the permits and the operation of Pure Water Monterey. So, you know, we need, there's still some work to be done at the staff level before we could have that plan.
So what you're looking at, June, July?
No, I think we're looking a little sooner than that.
Well, yeah.
but-
Next month, May?
Well,
I would like something on the agenda that the
Yeah.
full board can finally get to this water for housing and how our restraints and get that conversation out of the way so the public will know.
Agreed.
That's where I'm at. So the public would know that no, it's not gonna be no water for that until we get all this stuff put together. So we need to have that public discussion. I'm
Yep,
glad
and
the
we-
chair is here too, so she
Yep,
can
and
hear
we-
my concerns.
Yeah, but we still have some staff level discussion to be had.
Well, we need to, y'all need to have them. So we
Between
can
the
get
three
this
big
going.
parties. Agreed.
I want to just comment too, in some ways, 25 acre feet seems like it's within rounding errors. It's such a small amount of water. It's hard for me to make a big deal out of not, holding that back in some fashion. All we need is Sand City to produce a normal year, and we've got the water. And still, it's a small number, very, very low number. And it's also a planning number for, I mean, it's a commitment, but also it's a planning number for 2 years out. And so it's hard for me to get really uptight about 25 acre feet for housing and try to stop what we're trying to accomplish just because what I think are the estimates. I'm not doubting the accuracy of any of these numbers, but I still think it's small enough to be considered in rounding numbers and the production. And I'm sure most of these numbers are the conservative numbers. So any good stroke of luck, and it doesn't mean luck. I mean, just a stroke performance of better performance can cover the 20 acre feet. So anyway, that's just a comment.
Yep. Now, what's going to happen, and it's unfortunate that we had a dry year last year. We're better off so far this year, but it could end up being dry or at least below normal. And so what rain gets you is an addition to ASR and an offset with the Table 13 water rights. You can get more water out of the river. And so absent that, we're not building the bank up either at ASR. So it's, the drier conditions have come home to roost a little bit. Although, as I've said, I think we're absolutely fine this year through September 30th. We're highly likely to be fine next year because we've already got just over 1,350 acre feet, I think 1,361 in the ground at ASR. So that the shortfall could be met completely there, even though there's some other sources, Malpaso and so forth. So, we're not talking about a problem that's any closer than, a year and a half away. And so there will be a lot of new information that will reveal itself, hopefully this year, this winter, and next year. And but anyway, this is just, I think it's important that we know that it is tight, and just having the water now with what we know about extraction capacity, it's not just delivery of water, it's making it available to the customer. So that's what we're looking at. Moving on to item 7. Let's see. So this again is from the staff notes. The question here is, what does it take to lift the CDO? I think the staff note itself is fairly clear and explanatory, but I just wanted to revisit the tests, because when you look at the pumping on the river and the legal right to pump, you would think that that difference is less than 3,500 that Pure Water Monterey has stepped in, that we should be great. We should be lifting the CDO today. And the problem, of course, is simultaneous with this ramping down on the river has been the ramp down on the Seaside Basin. So we've lost the other sources that have been available. So we still remain short. And this test 2 is the exact same thing we looked at for the near term. That's you're short. There are supplies, ASR and Sand City desal, which are these first 2 right there. And in normal behavior, normal years, you get 1,500 acre-feet from those 2. So problem solved. But as we're pointing out, we're just getting started in the hydrologic cycle. You know, we want like a 40-year hydrologic period so that ASR is operating more like a reservoir. You got wet years, you put more into the ground, dry years take some out. On average, over time, we've shown that you can get 1,300 acre-feet out of ASR year in and year out if you've gone through some normal hydrologic cycles. We're just starting a little bit constrained. Pure water Monterey expansion comes on board. Table 13 water rights in a normal year, at least 100. In a wet year, it could be 300 or 400. But once we're there, the company would like to leave 700 acre-feet behind for 25 years as a way to help recover the overdraft of the Seaside Basin. So including that 700 as a negative, you know, all of these supplies on an average year basis is 3,150 compared with the shortfall. That gives us more than enough. And if you, again, I know some people don't like using the AMBAC growth forecast, but the AMBAC growth forecast said, hey, look, you know, your future needs are 39 acre-feet per year. Well, that amount minus this amount is what's available for the future. And it's still decades of water availability. So what we're looking at for the long term is based on the averages, we will have more than enough. So the key for lifting the CDO is being able to go in and demonstrate that you've got more than enough water, which even if you decrease ASR to some level, or if you say, well, table 13 is rain dependent, let's ignore that. You're still going to have a number that the total is bigger than the shortfall, which will produce sufficient water for a decade, 2 decades. You could double the growth rate, saying there's pent up demand. As soon as we have new water, a whole bunch of it's going to go out the door. You know, we've modeled those scenarios, but at the end of the day, it's demonstrating that you have not just the near-term supplies to not violate the CDO, which is what we talked about in the last item in the agenda, but we have more than enough that we're not going to be violating the CDO 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think we'll be in a position to do it. The staff note described how the lifting of the CDO requires Cal-Am to present evidence that there's a sufficient supply. I think they're a little risk averse, and there are policy reasons for them to say, well, this isn't enough water. We still need a desal plant. So we're hopeful, and we've been given some indication that even though the CDO is written requiring Cal-Am to produce the evidence, that any of the parties could produce the evidence and start the process. So we will have that capability if Cal-Am doesn't choose to do so. And then once that happens, you saw the description in the staff note about how to lift the moratorium at the PUC.
Mhm.
And that's simply an advice letter filing. So that's not a lengthy process, not like a full-blown application. It's a 30-day process. So, we're optimistic that worst case, if you had to wait until Pure Water Monterey expansion comes online, then you're, 24 to 30 months away from asking to lift the CDO. I think smartest case is as soon as you begin construction, you start the process, and then try to, develop the arguments, have a workshop. I think the State Water Board will want some sort of public comment period or workshop or something before issuing their concurrence with the evidence. So anyway, all of that's going to take some time. The worst thing that could happen is the State Board would say, hey, great, you've got the expansion, run it for a year and then show us the results, because that would just mean a year after completion, because the expansion is an extension of a known project that's will have an operating history, pretty good operating history by that time. We think you can start a little earlier because it's just an add-on. So that's kind of the game plan, but that's all I have on this topic for this day to this committee.
Dave, have you looked at those new numbers that for housing that came out from the state?
Oh yeah, sure.
And-
Yeah, so that's going to be on the Water Demand Committee agenda next month. We're going to talk about that.
Okay,
But they are unrealistically high, and we will talk about what that means.
yeah, because I would want to know if there's enough water in this project that we going forward. Is there enough water for it? So that's one for me.
Yep.
Any other board questions? Committee questions?
I had a question.
Go ahead. Dave.
This has to do with climate change, but also the infrastructure that's required for more massive rains and runoffs. It seems to me the work that's been done on ASR and injections, and then I'm not sure how the Title 13 works into this. But do you think we have the infrastructure in place to deal with the more massive rain volumes that are likely to occur in the future?
My reaction is I'd love to see another ASR-oriented well over in the Carmel Valley. I don't know, John, if you've got an opinion on this you want to weigh in with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are plans to have yet another well put in, redrill some. The bottleneck of the ASR program is definitely the production out of the Carmel Valley right now. So anything that can be done to improve that would be good as far as water supply infrastructure. But what was not clear with me, Director, was if your question was related to water supply or flooding.
Well, just because we're going to have more massive water, falling on us. What's the infrastructure that might be available to capture it? I'm not making a distinction where that comes from.
Yeah, I think that then I would say, yes, I agree with Dave's answer that more production capacity, whether it is new wells or investigation into, we have talked with the Water Supply Committee before about moving forward with the component of 2808 B water rights and rainy collectors and looking down those roads too. So that's since we brought that to you last year, that's been going on in the background with consultants and modeling and looking at making plans with some of those scenarios that we presented to the committee a year or so ago. So the ones that are near term would be improving the existing ASR infrastructure and increasing the diversion rates out of the Carmel Valley until you reach the throughput of the treatment plant as the cap, and then would be to move forward with secondary projects as we discussed about a year ago. So that's kind of the near and far term of that.
Okay, just wanting to get a little clue on how things look. Thank you.
Okay. Chair Paul, any other questions before we close?
No, not right now.
Yeah, I
Thank-
forgot. We do have one more agenda item. The status of Fort Ord well deep number 9, which will be really brief.
Sure. It's actually Fort Ord Shallow is the one that failed, and we were able
Oh,
to.
yeah, sorry,
we-
John.
It's okay. It's okay. We were able to. It was because a lot of the focus we were talking about was how do we destroy the shallow well and keep the deep well, because the deep well is named in our ASR permit. So that's why we were focusing on the discussion on the deep well prior. And we were able to obtain a license for entry onto the Presidio. And we completed the sealing of Fort Ord 9 Shallow about 2.5 weeks ago. And so we had a license to enter and could do the public work for 7 days, and it took us 2 days to do it, and it went flawless. And we've moved off Fort Ord 9 Shallow and have filed all the correct paperwork with the county, and the well is now officially and safely destroyed. And so it is no longer cross-connecting the shallow and the dune sands and the Paso Robles.
And the potential replacement well is sitting as a action item on an unfilled, oh no, it's actually the remaining filled engineering staff position at Marina Coast Water District. They're down a couple of technical bodies, and so their plate is very, very full. But it has been assigned to one of the Marina Coast Water District folks. They've signaled they want to replace the well at some point, and they would welcome some cost sharing and what have you. But until they fill all their positions, I expect it's not going to be a front burner issue.
Well, that's good, because if you hurt their feelings on these extraction wells 1 and 2 that they want to get, you know, I don't want them to feel too bad about it. But that letter that you send over there, please send it through the full board so the chair and everybody can vote. Yep, Mr. Laredo and you can do a strong one, and then you can do the good old pat, you know, okay. But you know, I prefer a strong letter saying we're not giving up rights or anything.
Yeah,
So-
Dave Loretto, you remember that email I sent you saying, hey, here's my understanding. These are our rights under our legislation. Here's our rights under the Seaside Basin adjudication. We overlap in boundaries. We've got authorities. Something along that line would be a good first letter.
Would agree. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and send it through the board and through the chair and vice chair, so we can get that on the agenda for April this month, so we can get ahead of that. Anything else, anybody?
Public comment?
Any public comment?
Chair Edwards, I do not see anybody with their hands raised, so I'll return this back to the committee.
No comment? Good meeting, General Manager. I can wait on too much now, since you filled me up today. If not,
Yeah,
anything
the full meeting, thanks.
There's more.
Yeah.
we adjourn. Have a
Thank
good
you.
week.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
Thank
John,
you.
appreciate you trying to cover for me.